All right, so a lot of people are not quite familiar with the Cold War. And before we even get started jumping into what the Cold War even is, what it's even about, what I really want you to do is, for the entire time you're really thinking about this, I want you to think of a guy or a gal who's sweating and does that really funny thing where they loosen their collar a little bit. That's kind of what this is. There are three events that we're going to talk about in particular that really, when they were all over, everybody was pretty much doing one of these, was trying to move their collar to try and let some air in because they were sweating. So what I want to start with is just simply this picture. This picture is quite interesting, and it really is where we can begin our journey here. So this is at the Yalta Conference, this picture you're looking at right here. This is at the Yalta Conference. Doesn't matter where Yalta is, it just matters that this is roughly around the end of World War II. This guy right here is Franklin Delano Roosevelt, U.S. President. This guy here is Winston Churchill, British Prime Minister. And this guy here is Joseph Stalin. He is the guy in charge in the Soviet Union. And these three are at the Yalta Conference, among other conferences. They discussed what they would like to see the world look like when World War II is over. And after a lot of planning and consideration, they came up with this, and I will show you here in just a second. And I'm using a computer. I like having these things in front of me, as long as you get the full idea here. So, Allied occupation of Germany. And I'm only clicking around because I want to show you kind of what it looked like. So this entirety you see here is Germany after World War II has ended. As you can see here, World War II ended in 1945. This is 1947. And what I really want you to notice here, and this is important, red is Soviet Union. Green is the British. Blue is the French. Orange is the orange is the United States. This is how they decided to do it. They decided to take Germany and say, okay, this zone, Soviet Russia, you get this zone. United Kingdom, you get this zone. Over here, France, you get this zone. Over here, America, you get this zone. And then, for some reason, and I cannot tell you why, but for some reason, if you look over here, we have a place deep in the heart of the Soviet-held territory. We have Berlin. Berlin is the capital of Germany. It's a really important city. It's the biggest city in the country. They divided that up too. So let's take a look real quick. So we've gone from the whole country being divided up. Now we're going in a little bit further. So actually, let's see if I can show you what Berlin looked like. I'm hoping I can. If not, we can just zoom in on the other picture. Okay, looks like we'll have to do that. Let's take a look then. This is Berlin. And as you can see, if we remember our directions, we go up this way for north, this way for east, down for south, and this way for west. So this is going to be East Germany. And inside of East Germany, in Berlin, you have East Berlin and West Berlin. This right here. So, to recap, World War II is over. After World War II, the three powers, the big three, the United States, the Soviet Union, and the United Kingdom, all came up with this arrangement for how Germany was going to look after Hitler. And inside of the Soviet part of Germany, which is what is going to be called East Germany, inside of East Germany is Berlin. And inside of Berlin, you have East Berlin, occupied by the Soviets, and then you have West Berlin, occupied by the Americans, the British, and the French. All right, now I've set the stage. I don't know quite how this arrangement, I'm not saying this arrangement is particularly great, but it is the arrangement they came to. Now, I asked you a question. What three events explain the tone of the Cold War? There's all kinds of things we can get into here. But it really boils down to, in a lot of cases, to me, is communism and capitalism. These two different economic ideologies that both sides didn't want to let go of, or even let other nations grab a hold of, really. It's going to grow into that. Also, keep an eye out for Berlin. It will come into play very soon. Alright, we've set up the background. This is how Germany looked after World War II, and this is how Berlin looked after World War II. Let's take a look at this map again, and now I have a question for you. My question is simply this. There are the United States, the UK, and France are all in this part, deep in the heart of Soviet-held Germany. How do they get supplies in? How do these people eat and sleep? Well, not sleep, I shouldn't say. How do these people eat? How do these people have razors to shave their face? Like, things like that. And the answer really is, there are roads that lead into here. There's canals that can go from this side of Germany over here. And there's also railroads that go into here. So that being said, if I'm Joseph Stalin, I do not want these guys around. What am I going to do? The answer is, we are going to block all the roads. We are going to block all of the canals. And then we are going to block all of the railroads. So now we have a problem. What does the United States do in this situation? What is Truman going to do in response? A lot of people said, you should just leave. You should just get out of there. You have West Germany right here. Who needs Berlin? And Truman could have gone that way, but Truman did not. And in fact, Truman started our first major event in the Cold War. and that would be this. It's known as the Berlin Blockade, but it's also called the Berlin Airlift. As you can see here, and I'm not going to read the whole Wikipedia article to you, of course, but as you can see, the United States, as well as the United Kingdom, France, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa even, were all part of an effort to fly these planes into Berlin to hand out supplies to the people living in West Berlin. The Soviets were so sure this wouldn't work, and it did. Now, in order to accomplish that, I want you to understand that every day from June 24th, 1948 to May 12th, 1949, there had to have been a plane during daylight every 30 seconds. 30 seconds every day for 323 days. And it worked. So Truman was able to avoid total war, and he was still able to keep the United States, France, and the United Kingdom in West Berlin. Once again, I go back to this guy here in the stress, with the stress collar. Just, whew! Could have had total war. Stalin could have blocked these, and Truman said, you know what? We're going to fight you. Those are ours. But Truman and his cabinet, I am certain, came up with the plan to fly all of these in. Why doesn't the Soviets shoot them out of the sky? Because the Soviets want to avoid war as well. That's going to be a theme as we go forward in this Cold War. No one wants total World War III. We're going to come close. We really are. But not quite. Let's move on to the second one. So, our first big event that can really tell us the tone of the Cold War is the Berlin Airlift. So that was one. Let's go now to Checkpoint Charlie, and this is going to be interesting. So, bear with me for a moment. If I could just... This might help. Oh, perfect. Okay. Well, this is what happens when we don't prepare ahead of time. That's okay. Let me see if I can find anything here. Okay. Maybe we should be able to use this. Okay. This is West Berlin. This is East Berlin. The Soviets are in East Berlin. The Americans, the British, and the French are in West Berlin. By this time, we were in 1949. Now we're in about 1962, 1963. Now the West, the countries who had the West are now unified. They're just basically West Germany and West Berlin. And then this is still the Soviet side. What I want you to understand about really where this comes from. one side has not rebuilt their side of the city since World War II. So even though it's 1963 and World War II ended in 1945, if I lived here in East Berlin, there would still be rubble everywhere from all of the bombs that fell during World War II. I see that. I see crumbling buildings around me. It's just really bleak to live here. And then I'm able to go to West Berlin. And when I look in West Berlin, the Americans, the French, and the British have all basically rebuilt the city. And when I see that, I'm seeing like these flashing lights, I'm seeing movie theaters, I'm seeing people driving in cars, I see people in really fancy clothes, I see people selling food on the street, even though back home food is really scarce. And I mean, what are you gonna do? I'm definitely going to move. If I lived here and I saw all of that over here in West Berlin, yeah, I'd want to move. And that was the issue that this guy, Nikita Khrushchev, so Stalin dies and Khrushchev becomes the Soviet premier, which is just basically the guy in charge. Khrushchev becomes in charge, and Khrushchev knows that people here in East Berlin are just going over to West Berlin in droves, and he wants it to stop. He wants it to stop. It's humiliating, and not only is it humiliating, but this side, West Germany, West Berlin, is going to have much more influence on what happens. So Khrushchev wants them gone. Interesting thing about that, we've already tried to block everything. We can't shoot them out of the sky, because if we shoot them out of the sky, that's an act of war, and that's what we are trying to avoid. But we also really, really want the Americans out of this area. So, Khrushchev goes up to Kennedy. John F. Kennedy is the president at this time, and says, you need to leave. Kennedy is just, or else what? Basically, the or else what came in the form of not really letting diplomats cross over into East Berlin. So a diplomat is someone who can really, as long as they show their paperwork, they can travel between they can travel freely between these two parts of the city quite easily. Kind of out of nowhere, the Soviets were not letting them through. And when the Soviets weren't letting them through, John F. Kennedy decided to retaliate. And this is how he retaliated. And it is quite amazing when you are able to really let it sink in. This is 1961, I should say. I am still really blown away by this picture. A lot of people say that, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and in this case, I think it's worth 1,000,000 words, to be quite honest with you. Just look at this. What you're looking at here, this is Checkpoint Charlie. So there are several checkpoints. They're basically, if you want to call them, portals to be able to cross from East and West Berlin to go back and forth. And this is one of the sectors, and it was called Checkpoint Charlie. And right here, you are looking at American tanks pointed at the other side of Checkpoint Charlie where the Soviets, that's the Soviets part. If you look, the Soviets are pointing their tanks at the Americans. This went on for a while. There was no one fired a shot in this whole situation. But if someone does, it's total war. It's World War III. I don't really know where this idea came up. It's so simple, and it's so simple when you think about it. John F. Kennedy and Khrushchev get on the phone with each other, and they both agree, like, hey, we really don't want this. So they were able, little bit by little bit, you don't really know the exact measurements, but they were able to both back up very short distance every maybe 1 hour or so. They would agree on, hey, we'll back up this distance. And so little bit by little bit of distance, we slowly are able to return to the guy in the stress collar. That's another. Whew! That was close. Finally, and this is what some people are, Oh, and I shouldn't mention the fact. I cannot believe I almost just glossed over this. After the incident at Checkpoint Charlie, Nikita Khrushchev built a wall, not himself, but the Soviets built a wall that separated East and West Berlin, so that no one could cross over. So now if I'm in East Berlin, I am stuck in East Berlin. Interesting thing, when you think about it. And we'll get into that more when we try to answer our big essential question for this little lesson I'm doing. So let's keep going. We're going to go to one more. And there's like 100 things you can talk about the Cold War, but these are the big three that I need you to mention. So I need you to know. So one of the big reasons people like talking about the Cold War, and I'll admit I'm one of those people, is when we talk about these bad boys. These are nuclear weapons. Through the magic of science, we are able to make a nuclear reaction be so large and so powerful that we can wipe out a city in a second. A lot of different, I don't want to say a lot, but there's a handful of countries that have weapons like this. And in the Cold War, this is our first look at weapons that have this kind of destructive magnitude. This is Ivy Mike, for example. Ivy Mike, I believe, was, I think it was the first nuclear weapon detonated by the United States. So before there were atomic weapons, it's probably what you saw when you were that is what you saw when you were watching Oppenheimer. These are thermonuclear weapons, which are much more powerful. The United States and the Soviet Union had both developed these by the end of the 1950s. So now we're talking about two countries that keep getting in these standoffs, that not only would it be conventional war, but it would also be this. It would also be nuclear war. So I wanted to show you Ivy Mike. That's the first one, but just to give you an idea of how destructive these were, there's this one called Castle Bravo. Castle Bravo was detonated by the United States, but it was 3 times more powerful than they had originally thought. I mean, I'm letting you know, like, that is a new, we're charting new waters here. it is so destructive. It went from an atomic bomb, which could level a city. One of these can not only level a city, it can level pretty much almost a lot. I mean, I don't want to say everything around it, but let's take a look here just real quick. Let's just say one of these hit New York, for example. We should be able to look at a here we should be able to look at just how big one of these can level a city even. I'm sorry, I'm trying to get it to where it'll show you its entire destruction. Well, I thought it would show you the map. This is what I get again. My point is, the atomic, like, you see this explosion. Let's just take a look at this real quick, and we'll get back to our third event here in just a moment. I've gotten off track, but you look at an explosion like this, and then when you look at the detonation over Hiroshima or Nagasaki, look, this is the first, this one on the left here is the first, like, nuclear explosion used in warfare. And this one is the second. Just looking at these pictures and you compare it to Castle Bravo, it is night and day. This is preschool when you really look at something like this. So I say that with I'm just providing context for where this third event comes from. And I want you to start by learning and just getting familiar with this man. Fidel Castro. Fidel Castro is a socialist, which is, communist socialists. They're the same thing when we're talking about things like this. And the United States, and just to give you an idea, if you're not really fully into geography, Castro is from Cuba. And because he's from Cuba, we're going to take a look here. This is Florida. Cuba is right here. The end of Florida, and I guess you would call the beginning of Cuba, are only 90 miles apart. So when a socialist communist guy, whom the United States does not like anybody communist, socialist, when a communist guy sets up a government right here, 90 miles away from the United States, it's going to make the United States a little scared, a little jumpy. There's a bit of backstory when it comes to this specifically, and I'll just run into it here real quick. So if we zoom in on Cuba, I believe the Bay of Pigs is right around here. Let me take a look real quick. I believe it is. Oh, no, okay. I was actually wrong. I'm not into my Cuban geography as much as I should be. But basically, our friend Fidel takes over throughout the old government. He led a rebellion that threw out the old government that was in charge of Cuba, and then he became in charge of Cuba. And when he did, the United States wanted to attempt to remove him. They tried several different things, and one of them is what we call the Bay of Pigs invasion. This is where the Bay of Pigs is. Well, I thought we were going to see that. Let's zoom in on that again. This is the Bay of Pigs. The United States trained people in Cuba that were against Castro to fight back. And the United States tried to help them. Someone with more historical knowledge than I do would be able to tell you if the United States like actually invaded or if they were just helping or something. But the long story short is that this invasion or this attempt to try and overthrow Fidel Castro completely failed. And because of this, Fidel is nervous. The United States is a really powerful government. He is communist. They hate communists. And Fidel wants to stay in power. So he is going to ask the Soviet Union for help. When Khrushchev gets asked for Fidel's help, when Khrushchev gets asked for help from Fidel, he doesn't give him help out of like, oh, I love Fidel so much. He wants to help Fidel, not really to keep him in power necessarily, but imagine we have a friend that is 90 miles away from America. So Fidel wants protection, and part of that protection is going to be these nuclear weapons that the Soviets have already built. The Soviets' plan is to carry these on boats all the way through the Atlantic Ocean here, and then we'll bring them down here to Cuba. This is all done in secret, of course. No one's announcing this. But eventually, John F. Kennedy, the President of the United States, gets word of this. And he does not appreciate it at all. So, right about here where my mouse is, we're a ways away from Cuba here, where my mouse is now, but we're still kind of near. We're still kind of close. We're still kind of like anything that's going to Cuba, we will be able to notice. John F. Kennedy decides to put up a barrier right here. And the barrier means that no Soviet ship can go past this line right here. Well, here we go. We are at what is called the Cuban Missile Crisis. Welcome to event number 3. We've had the Berlin airlift, we've had the incident at Checkpoint Charlie, and now we have the Cuban Missile Crisis. I cannot tell you. I probably will never even be able to describe the worry that people in power are feeling. This could be it, boys. A nuclear-tipped submarines were in these waters. The Soviets were the ones with the nuclear-tipped submarines. I shouldn't say nuclear-tipped submarines. I should say nuclear torpedo, of course. Sorry. And when it really looked like this was going to be it. The thing that out of nowhere, Kennedy and Khrushchev, during this period of about 9 days, I believe, were not speaking to one another. They had spoken to each other and done really well in working together at Checkpoint Charlie. Here, they are not speaking to each other. And over 9 days, Soviet ships and American naval ships were pointing their weapons at each other here in the water. And eventually, I believe Khrushchev calls, and this is something really important. In order to solve this crisis, let's unpack what's happened to Europe at this point. If we zoom in on Europe here, this is Europe today, but here's Germany, West and East Germany. This whole area right here, what you see, so Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Belarus, Ukraine, Moldova, Romania, all of these are part of the Soviet Union. And what came about before this was this thing called NATO, which was any of these countries, so West Germany, Netherlands, France, Belgium, United Kingdom, Italy, and the two important ones, Turkey and Greece. They formed an alliance that said, Russia, or anyone, if you attack us, you attack all of us. So an attack on one will get a response from all. Greece and Turkey are part of this alliance, and because they are part of this alliance, there were nuclear weapons stationed here. And remember, at the time, this is the Soviet Union, this is Soviet Russia, this is Soviet Russia too, and these nuclear weapons are pointed here. These nuclear weapons are stationed very close to here. So, Khrushchev says, Kennedy, if you take your nuclear weapons out of Greece and out of Turkey, we will take ours out of Cuba. And it worked. It worked. Once again, it is another phew moment, and it is probably the most intense phew moment out of all three of those we mentioned. There are wars that happened during this time. You can talk about proxy wars. You can talk about communism versus capitalism. You can talk about so many different things in the Cold War. But in order to answer, I feel, and you can probably do this with any other topic in the Cold War, but my essential question was, what three major events explain the tone of the Cold War? And for me, the Berlin airlift, the Checkpoint Charlie, and the Cuban Missile Crisis all scream to me that those events can explain just how tense it was during this period of time. I am not a historian, so if there is anything that needs to be corrected for the historical record, please let me know. Remember, during the Cold War, remember this guy fixing his collar because he's sweating underneath it and he needs to allow some air in. And of course, think of Fidel Castro.